Top of the morning to you and welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Olumide Macaulay. The headlines. Child killed, 6 wounded in Russian raid in eastern Ukraine. U.S. State Department calls Lukashenko's comments on Poland irresponsible, pledges to defend NATO ally. Plus, UN nuclear watchdog chief Rafael Grossi says agency discovered mines at Zaporizhzhia plant site. Thank you for joining us. A child has been killed and 6 people wounded in a Russian attack on the eastern Ukrainian city of Kostyantynivka. Donetsk region's governor says the Russian forces fired Smersh rockets at a local pond where people were resting. The governor, Pavlo Kyrylenko, who communicated via telegram, added that 3 children are amongst those injured in that incident. Now, the White House said it does not support attacks inside Russia after being asked about drones which damaged buildings in Moscow on Monday. Russia is speaking of taking harsh retaliatory measures against Ukraine after 2 drones damaged buildings in its capital city, including one close to the Defense Ministry's headquarters, in what it called a brazen act of terror. Nobody was hurt in the attack, of which a senior Ukrainian official said there will be more. But one drone attack close to the Moscow building where the Russian military holds briefings on what it calls its special military operation, a symbolic blow, which underscores the reach of such drones. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, whose government rarely comments on attacks inside Russia or on Russian-controlled territory, had promised what he called a retaliation to Russian terrorists for Odessa.
In Moscow, we've been clear that as a general matter, we do not support attacks inside of Russia. But we also have been very clear that Crimea is indeed Ukraine. And so, again, this is something that when it comes to this war, this is, as we all know, Russia started this war and they can end this today. But what we will continue to do, we'll continue to provide security assistance to Ukraine, as we have been for more than 15 months, as they are fighting for their freedom, fighting for their sovereignty. This is their war. They started this war. And they could end it, you hear us say this all the time, they can end it at any time. Anytime. By withdrawing forces from Ukraine instead of launching brutal attacks on civilians, on Ukraine cities. And that's what they do, doing every day on this brutal attack for more than 15 months. Russia has been bombarding the Ukrainian port of Odessa, killing and injuring Ukrainian civilians, devastating UNESCO-listed World Heritage Sites, as I mentioned at the top, and destroying tens of thousands of tons of grain that were going to be shipped to countries around the world.
The president urged Israeli leaders to compromise.
Meanwhile, the U.S. State Department is criticized as irresponsible reported comments from the Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko saying that Russia's Wagner mercenary group are keen to push into Poland. Last week, the Belarusian Defense Ministry announced Wagner fighters have started to train Belarusian special forces at a military range just a few miles from the Polish border. Asked about comments by President Vladimir Putin warning Poland against attack in Belarus, State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller reiterates that the United States will defend Poland, a NATO ally. Poland is moving extra troops towards the border with Belarus in response to the arrival of the Wagner forces who relocated there after staging a short-lived uprising in Russia last month.
It is another in a series of irresponsible comments by Lukashenko. And the only thing I will reiterate, as I said, about another matter, earlier in this briefing, the United States will defend every inch of NATO territory. I don't know how much you should read into them. I would say that there's only one country in the region that has demonstrated not only the intent but the willingness to invade its neighbors, and that's Russia, not Poland, not any other country in the region. And so I would just reiterate that our alliance with Poland is strong. Poland is a NATO member, of course, and we will defend, if necessary, every inch of NATO territory.
Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is accusing Russia of obstructionism of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe during a meeting with the OSCE's Secretary General Helga Schmidt. Meanwhile, Russia, on its part, is accusing the OSCE of handing information on the location of Russian and pro-Russian forces to Western and Ukrainian intelligence. Critics have also accused Russia of using its veto in the OSCE to stall decisions and suspend payments to the body. The OSCE is an international organization that includes former Cold War foes, the United States and Russia, and various countries in Europe, Central Asia, and North America.
For Ukraine as it continues to face this egregious. It's vitally important that the OSCE be able to continue all of its work and all of its missions. Unfortunately, it's been on the receiving end of considerable obstructionism from Russia in trying to prevent it from moving forward. But despite that, thanks to the very good work of the Secretary General and the team, it's found ways to continue to do its work, and it's vital that that remain the case. I look forward to discussing the vital work the OSCE is doing, the support the United States has for it, and in particular, in this moment, the work that it's doing to show unified support for Ukraine as it continues to face this egregious Russian aggression.
We have lots of things on our agenda, lots of challenges, and with all the challenges to security we're facing, I think we have to work together. And this is what we do also in the OSCE when we support Ukraine, you mentioned it, Moldova, when we combat threats such as climate change or human trafficking, where the OSCE really delivers unique added value. I would say real value for money. We are delivering for 1.3 billion citizens across the OSCE area, from Kansas to Kiev to Kazakhstan. But there's even more we should do, we could do, and this is why I'm here, and this is what I'm looking forward to discussing.
Lithuania's State Defense Council has approved a military assistance plan to Ukraine worth 200 million euros, equivalent to $221 million. Revealing this in a statement, the Lithuanian Defense Ministry says the assistance to the armed forces of Ukraine is approved for 2024 to 2026. It also added that the package covers acquisition of lethal and non-lethal aid, military training, repair of military equipment in Lithuania, and personnel training. A video journalist at a France agency, AFP, Dylan Collins, has been wounded while on assignment in Ukraine. According to his colleague, Stefani Yusuf, Collins sustained multiple shrapnel injuries in the attack in a forested area near Bakhmut. He's been evacuated to a nearby hospital where he's being treated, and doctors say his condition is not life-threatening. Stefani added that Collins is conscious and speaking to colleagues while investigations into the incident are ongoing. Ukraine's state-owned energy company is sounding an alarm that the water level of the Dnipro hydroelectric plant has dropped to a critical level following the destruction of the Nova Kakhovka dam last month. In further information, the company says the average level of the lower bit near the Dnipro hydroelectric plant is 39 feet above sea level, but for the full operation of the Dnipro hydroelectric station, the water level must be at least 39 to 41 feet. The company is now looking for appropriate project solutions so that the station can operate at full capacity. Experts from the International Atomic Energy Agency have discovered mines at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant site. Agency Chief Rafael Grossi affirmed this at the beginning of the week. This is a claim that Ukraine has been making for some time. Grassi added that the IAEA team has been aware of the previous placement of mines outside and inside of the plant, and that they were told it was a military decision and in an area controlled by the military. Mr. Grossi calls having explosives at the site inconsistent with the safety standards and nuclear security guidance. The Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is currently occupied by Russian forces. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky has repeatedly called on world leaders to put pressure on Russia to hand the station over to the IAEA and for Russian fighters to leave the territory of the station. Now let's speak to the publisher of Business Ukraine magazine and editor of Lviv Today at the Odessa Review, Mr. Peter Dickinson, joining us virtually from Kiev. Mr. Dickinson, how's your Ukrainian this morning? Доброго ранку.
Доброго ранку. Good morning.
Could we begin with these latest attacks that seems to be tit for tat between Ukraine and Russia ever since the expiration of the Black Sea grain deal, the attack on the bridge to Crimea, subsequent attack in Odessa, multiple ones, and now the drone attack on Moscow. At the beginning of this war, and maybe even up till now, one may get the sense that Russia is not throwing everything it has at the Ukrainians. Is this correct? And will this latest attack from Ukraine help to, or end up, rather, in poking the bear and possibly escalate something that is already at an escalatory level?
Well, the idea that Russia is somehow demonstrating restraint or is not using its full capabilities in Ukraine has been present since the very beginning of the war, but there's very little evidence to suggest that Russia is holding significant military capacity in reserve. Of course, Russia is holding its nuclear capacity in reserve. Russia is not using nuclear weapons. But beyond that, we have seen the destruction of entire cities. There are dozens of cities in east and southern Ukraine that no longer exist effectively now following Russia's attacks. Thousands of civilians have been killed. We've seen hospitals, very many residential areas destroyed, schools, cultural landmarks and elements of Ukraine's cultural heritage, and of course the country's civilian infrastructure, the power infrastructure, which was hit throughout the winter months. So the question, I think, really for Russia is in terms of the quantity of armaments that it has and the size of Ukraine. There's very little indication that Russia is actually restrained in its fighting or is in any way seeking to minimize or reduce the damage being done to Ukraine. On the contrary. However, the nature of the war may determine the targets. So obviously, since the Russians decided to withdraw from the grain deal, the Black Sea grain deal, they have very openly targeted Ukraine's main port, Odessa. So over the last week, we've seen them bombing there and also elsewhere on the Black Sea coast. Now, the expectation is that that will now continue, but it seems a stretch to say that this is somehow an escalation or that it was somehow a retaliation for actions that Ukraine has taken. I think it's simply an indication of Russia's current priority, which is to disable Ukraine's potential to export and to put off any potential partners who may be looking and thinking, well, you know what, we actually don't fear Russia's navy. I'm thinking here primarily of Turkey, but it could be other NATO nations who may be tempted to ignore Russia's withdrawal from the Black Sea grain deal and seek to proceed without Russia.
But so that is exactly what they said, Mr. Dickinson. They said it was retaliatory. They said after the Crimea bridge, they'll respond in an appropriate measure. And they did that. And Ukraine also has been quoted as saying that this strike in Moscow is because of Odessa.
Well, I think the narrative of retaliation is quite an effective narrative in times of war, and both sides have used this, particularly when the other side has scored a significant success. The Crimean Bridge has long been a symbol of Russia's attack on Ukraine, of Russian imperialism in Ukraine. It is essentially a monument to Russia's occupation of the Crimean Peninsula. So Russia has always said any attacks on the bridge are a red line and will be viewed as a very grave attack on Russia's key infrastructure. Now, this reflects the importance of the bridge in terms of its logistical value. It also reflects the importance of the bridge in its symbolic value, because the bridge is very closely personally associated with Vladimir Putin. So essentially an attack on the Crimean Bridge is viewed both by Russia and by Ukraine as a personal slap in the face, as it were, to Vladimir Putin. So I think it's very tempting for both sides to talk about retaliation, but I don't think there's really any realistic military argument to suggest that they were somehow holding back these options before. They simply chose to make the symbolic moves at this point to demonstrate their ability to strike back. And for Ukraine, that means hitting Moscow. For Russia, that has meant targeting Odessa.
One of the reasons Ukraine has been able to defend itself significantly well, efficiently, is because of the Patriot air defense systems that they are using. Do you know where the country stands now with other equally effective air defense systems, and maybe the Iron Dome from Israel, which they say that Israel wasn't keen on helping them with?
Well, I think the Patriot system really stands alone as the most effective system. The invasion of Ukraine has been a testing ground for all manner of different military technologies and armaments. And of all of the different technologies, I think the Patriot system has possibly been the most effective, or has come out of it looking, with its reputation, the most enhanced. The Patriot systems that have been delivered to Ukraine have proved extremely effective. They have managed to shoot down missiles which Russia had previously boasted were unstoppable, effectively. And so the Patriot system now stands alone, and probably as the premier air defense system there, or certainly widely available air defense system in the world today. There is nothing that I'm aware of that could really compare with it from a Ukrainian standpoint. Ukrainians are very keen to get more Patriots. There is talk of them receiving more Patriot systems at this point, and they have a number of other systems from other partners, including from the Germans. You mentioned the Iron Dome in particular. The Iron Dome would certainly be an interesting addition to Ukraine's air defences. It's questionable how effective the Iron Dome would be against major missile attacks. It would probably be most useful against drone attacks. But at the same time, the Iron Dome is Israeli. It's Israeli technology. It's Israeli owned. Israel has been very, very, very cautious about providing Ukraine with any military support. It's been very reluctant to get involved. Israel has a very complex and important relationship with Russia, which the Israelis are very eager not to disrupt. And they've been probably, from all the countries that are Western or Western aligned, the Israelis have probably been the most reluctant to openly side with Ukraine or provide Ukraine with weapons. So it does not look realistic at this stage that the Iron Dome will be provided because of Israel's geopolitical priorities, let's say. But even so, if it were to be provided, I don't think it would be a game changer. It would certainly be welcome. But Ukraine wants Patriots. If you ask a Ukrainian what they're looking for in terms of air defense, and they are looking always for more, they will tell you, we want more Patriots.
If President Alexander Lukashenko of Belarus was being jocular or joking when he insinuated or mentioned about Wagner forces being keen to push into Poland. It will be a very expensive joke. What do you think he meant by that, and what possible purpose could that serve?
Well, Lukashenko's role in this whole war is really as a foil, or as a support figure for the Russian invasion, and he will do whatever he can to support Vladimir Putin. Now, the one thing he doesn't want to do is send Belarusian soldiers into Ukraine from Belarus. He doesn't want to join the invasion directly. This is presumed to be because the Belarusian nation and the Belarusian army has no appetite for the war in Ukraine. They have no interest in it, and the danger from a Belarusian perspective is that if Lukashenko was to send his army into Ukraine, there is a good chance that they would mutiny, and there could be a very destabilizing process could take effect inside Belarus itself. So Lukashenko has resisted Russian efforts to enter the war directly, but he's shown a readiness to help Russia in any other way he can. Now, one of the things he's done is to host these very awkward for Russia Wagner troops, and now he seems to be intent on fueling speculation over possible attacks on the neighbouring territories, primarily Poland, which of course is a NATO member. Now, one would assume this is very, very far-fetched, but it does distract attention from the invasion in Ukraine. It does create the impression of a wider conflict, and it does create new headaches, which NATO planners and Polish security experts cannot afford to ignore, even if they seem far-fetched. So I think it's a very naughty attempt to distract from the invasion in Ukraine, to create new headaches for Western countries and for the military leadership in Poland itself. I don't think there's any realistic potential at this stage for any sort of actions by the Wagner troops against the EU, against NATO, against Poland. However, of course, you can never rule out some form of hybrid aggression, some form of attack in which the Wagner forces said, well, we're acting independently, and Belarus and Russia said, well, we don't know, they're nothing to do with us, they're not our army. So you never really know, but at this stage it looks to me like a very provocative and mischievous attempt to distract and divert attention.
Are you talking of maybe skirmishes at the border between Poland and Belarus, between the Wagner forces and the forces of Poland that they are massing near the border?
I think direct military engagement is very unlikely, and any form of engagement, be it hybrid or otherwise. I think it's unlikely that we'd see troops actually fighting on the border, but there's lots of other things that could happen. There could be sabotage operations, for example, sabotage of energy pipelines, of communication systems, of water supplies or other municipal infrastructure. There could be physical sabotage of border defences. There could be border raids. There's a lot of different ways in which these troops, who are amongst Russia's best troops, it should be recalled, could seek to make some sort of mischief there. But I think the actual act of engaging in hostilities looks very unlikely, because the West will not be prepared to sit back and say, oh, well, we don't know who did this. We don't know if it was Russia or not. They will be forced to act. Poland in particular has already shown a significant appetite to enter this war in terms of its supplies for Ukraine. I don't think there can be any realistic doubt that they would respond very forcefully if they were faced by something of a direct nature. But a lot of other options in which there's a lot of other opportunities for Wagner to make mischief. Poland would be one target. They may also seek to target the Baltic states, which are also nearby on bordering Belarus. Also members of NATO, and perhaps perhaps less prepared. So a very, very tricky situation there, but I don't think we're on the verge of a war between NATO and Belarus or Russia at this stage.
And as you say, it's very distracting, this comment by President Alexander Lukashenko, which is why we're having this conversation. Staying with him for a moment, diplomatically speaking, on the world stage, his actions at times not showing that he's not the sharpest knife in the drawer. What do you think of the position of Belarus in this situation? Is Alexander Lukashenko, and to give him credit of some sort, he says that a diplomatic solution is what should be on the table for negotiations, and he's spoken of wanting the war to come to an end. What's the position of Ukraine on Alexander Lukashenko? I understand he's not much loved.
No, he's not much loved. But interestingly, he was, if not loved, respected by many in Ukraine until 2020. Now, 2020 was a very decisive year for Belarus. It was a year that really changed the country's fortunes. Lukashenko has been in power since 1994, so he is one of the longest-serving rulers in the world, I believe, certainly by European standards, by far the longest ruler. And for many years, he played quite a delicate balancing act between Europe and the West on one hand and Russia on the other side. But then in 2020, he faced a very large domestic protest movement that was looking to oust him following a presidential election that was widely seen as falsified, as fraudulent. When he was faced by these massive protests, he essentially turned to Russia, which intervened to rescue him and has continued to support his regime ever since. So he has essentially become a client of the Kremlin. He depends on the Kremlin for his domestic political survival. So he's found himself dragged into Putin's confrontation with the West and the war in Ukraine. Now he seems to be playing a very cautious game, attempting to somehow distance himself from Russia, to make these commentaries about the need for a diplomatic solution. But there's no question that he is now essentially operating with very, very limited independence and is representing Russian interests by and large. So even in cases where he speaks of diplomacy, the diplomacy that he speaks of is essentially Russian diplomacy. He seeks a diplomatic solution that would suit Russia, not one that would suit Ukraine.
Thank you, Mr. Dickinson, for your views. He's one of the last strong men, we believe, if he's reigned for that long and been in power for that duration, which he has, he must be doing something right, at least to stay in that saddle. And one famous an American president, or popular American president, was asked of President Xi Jinping that whether he respected him, and he said that he's ruling a country of 1.4 billion people. He must be very sharp to be able to do that successfully. Thank you so much, Mr. Peter Dickinson, for your contributions this morning, publisher of the Business Ukraine magazine and editor at the Odessa Review. Many thanks.
Thank you.
After the break, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres issues passionate appeal to Russia to return to grain deal. Details in a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome back. We are in the sophomore stretch of the Russian invasion of Ukraine coverage today. The United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres is calling on Russia to return to the deal allowing the safe Black Sea export of Ukrainian grain in line with a proposal he made to President Vladimir Putin. Russia quit the agreement a week ago, saying that demands to improve its own food and fertilizer exports had not been met, and that not enough Ukraine grain had reached the poorest countries under the Black Sea deal. Since Russia quit the deal and began attacking Ukrainian food exporting ports on the Black Sea and the Danube River, Global wheat and corn futures have risen sharply. Mr. Guterres had written to President Putin on July the 11th in a final effort to save the deal. He proposed Russia extend it with a daily limit of 4 ships traveling to Ukraine and 4 ships leaving in return for connecting a subsidiary of Russia's agricultural bank to the SWIFT global payment system.
With the termination of the Black Sea Initiative, the most vulnerable will pay the highest price, as when food prices rise, everybody pays for it. We're already seeing the negative effect on global wheat and corn prices, which hurts everyone. But this is especially devastating for vulnerable people, vulnerable countries struggling to feed their people. The Russian Federation and Ukraine are both essential to global food security. They have historically accounted for roughly 30% of global wheat and barley exports, 1/5 of all maize, and more than half of all sunflower oil. For my part, I remain committed to facilitating the unimpeded access to global markets for food products and fertilizers from both Ukraine and the Russian Federation, and to deliver the food security that every person deserves. And I call on the Russian Federation to return to the implementation of the Black Sea Initiative in line with my latest proposal. And I urge the global community to stand united for effective solutions in this essential effort.
President Vladimir Zelensky is asking the European Union to ensure that, in his words, an unacceptable and non-European ban on Ukrainian grain imports to 5 countries is lifted by its impending deadline. In May, the EU allowed Bulgaria, Hungary, Poland, Romania, and Slovakia to ban domestic sales of Ukrainian wheat, maize, rapeseed, and sunflower seeds, while permitting transits of such cargoes for export elsewhere. The 5 Central European countries want the EU ban extended at least until the end of the year. The ban is set to expire on September the 15th. Lithuania is urging the European Union to use Baltic ports to export Ukrainian grain. A letter by 3 Lithuanian ministers to EU commissioners said Baltic ports could serve as a reliable alternative for transiting Ukrainian product, including cereal. The letter adds that Baltic ports could help transport 25 million tons of grain annually. It also asked the EU to cut red tape on Ukraine's border with Poland, a member of the bloc. Soldiers serving in one of Ukraine's newly formed storm brigades were using an Italian-made howitzer to fire on Russian positions in the Donetsk region over the weekend. A senior officer in the unit commended the Otto Melara Mod 56 for its mobility and precision, which he said meant there was no chance of civilian casualties.
Ну, яку дальність стрільби, стільки мішочків ми оставляємо. Зірвателі у нас тут знаходяться. Ліва до бою готова.
It's an appropriate time to bring in retired U.S. Army captain and national defense and military strategist, Captain Bish Johnson, who joins us from our Abuja studios, north central Nigeria. Thank you for being with us this morning.
Good morning, Olimide, and thank you for having me.
These weapons that we see of death and destruction, we just saw what they called the howitzer, Italian-made. They say that it's good for its precision and mobility. These are the sorts of weapons that Ukraine needs to prosecute its defense and counteroffensive in its war against Russia. How much of that capability is needed? Well, it's an obvious question. They do need these weapons. But do you see that these countries won't grow war-weary and stop supplying Ukraine with these weapons? Does Ukraine have to start to begin to possibly manufacture weapons of its own if it can?
Olamide, good morning, and once again, thank you for having me. Well, there is no question about that. Protracted wars, which is what Russia's plan is to ensure that this war drags on to the point that, the Western alliances will become tired and weary of the war. Usually, you can't win any war without the support of the civil population. By the time the impact of this war begins to be felt in all these countries, and their citizens begin to rise up against their government, those countries will become weary, and that may affect, the military assistance that the Ukrainians get. And so, to answer directly your question, I think the Ukrainians on their own part should begin to, think outside the box and begin to look at how they can begin to, produce some of all these things within their own country. Because although the Western alliances have assured the Ukrainians that they will continue to support them, but that should not be taken for granted. It cannot be guaranteed. Any political dynamics in any one of these countries can impact this the Western alliance support for the Ukrainians. So that makes it very imperative that the Ukrainians should begin to look inward on how to be able to sustain this war that Russians actually want to be protracted so as to wear out the Western alliances.
Exactly. So the shorter the duration of the war, the more it is in favor of Ukraine. And the longer it is, the better for Russia. Right?
That is very correct. That is very correct, because all of Russia is doing is organic. Russia is using its own, is a much more bigger military. There's no question about that. So Russia is using all of its organic weapons and the capability to prosecute this war. The Ukrainians, on the other hand, are depending on assistance from partners to be able to prosecute this war. And that assistance, the partnership, cannot be guaranteed. If you listen to some of the political discussions in the U.S., for example, there have been instances where some Republican leaders have, voiced some kind of dissenting view on U.S. support for Ukraine. And the United States is having a presidential election by next year. Nobody can predict the outcome of that election for now, but should there be a change in government, that change may somehow impact U.S. assistance to the Ukrainians. So that is why it is imperative that there's a diplomatic route to get out of this whole thing. Although I don't see that coming, because both parties are still digging in that unless their conditions are met, there will not be such thing as a diplomatic solution.
So let's stay with this for an instance. For the downside, the double-edged sword for the Russians, for instance, in the manufacture of these weapons, you've correctly alluded to the fact that they have more of an arsenal to draw from, and they're manufacturing some of these weapons themselves. Back in World War II, one of the reasons why Germany, the Nazi Germany, was so successful under the nefarious Adolf Hitler was that they had these manufacturing juggernauts in Germany, and they were pulling in prisoners of war from Poland, from other countries, to help in the manufacture of these weapons. So that helped them. They couldn't have done it by themselves with the German population. So they had these prisoners of war from different countries who are there in slavery conditions to help them make these weapons. Russia, is there a danger that they will begin to have dissent on the part of their own people as this war continues to go along, if it does get more drawn out, that the people of Russia themselves will become war-weary?
No question about that. No question about that, because whenever, look, this, when you engage in this kind of protracted conflict, something has to give up. You're spending money that could have been invested in other sector of your economy to boost the military operation. And so as you boost the military operation, those other sectors that are relevant to your citizens' survival will suffer significantly. And so at certain point, it will not, the patience of the people will now collapse. And that is when you begin to see, dissenting voices against, Putin for this war effort. So in as much as Russia wants this war to be protracted such that the West will lose patience in supporting the Ukrainians, Putin himself is also facing a danger of a long protracted war leading to lack of, a shortage of patience amongst, his own citizens. And by that time, you begin to see all these Russian oligarchs and, prominent Russian elites begin to withdraw their support for the war. And so it's a double-edged sword that can, can go either way. And so that is why both parties, we have to consider these factors and begin to explore avenues of diplomacy. I am sure that somewhere in the middle, there will be an acceptable solution to both parties, because at this point, I don't think either of the parties are going to get 100% of everything they're asking for. It's not just possible.
So it doesn't become a Vietnam, as it were, for President Putin. Captain Bish, let's talk about your opinion on the Wagner mercenary groups in Poland, in Belarus now, and the fact that the Polish are very squeamish about it, and they are moving some of their troops to the border. They've reinforced their border, the eastern part of Poland, with Belarus, and the comments of President Alexander Lukashenko hasn't helped any by saying that Wagner forces are keen to push into Poland. But our previous guest has addressed this. I want you to tell us what goes on in the mind of a mercenary soldier. These are soldiers for hire, soldiers for fortune. They do it to put food on their table. Is there more to that profession where you go from country to country just for the money and not for any other reason?
You've just alluded to the very point of the question that you've just asked. These non-state actors are not in any way bound by international organizations, treaties, and conventions. And so they act basically rogue in some instances because they are not restrained in what they can do and what they cannot do. Now, the danger to that is that with these Wagner groups now stationed near Poland, and the Poland being a member of NATO, we risk, escalation of this whole entire war. Because as you already know, the Article 5 of NATO, that an attack on one country is an attack on all of them. And the West views Wagner as a part and parcel of the Russian military, even though it's a private security organization, because they have demonstrated, their willingness to fight Russia dirty war all over the place, everywhere in the world. And so if they make any mistake in attacking Poland, we risk having an escalation between Russia and the NATO, which would be a disaster for the world.
Why does
Yes, private security companies. Yeah. Private security companies are in there. Private security or mercenary groups are in there for what is in there for them. Not necessarily out of patriotism, just as you will find in conventional soldiers who fight to defend their country, because these people make much more money than those who are serving for their country. We had that similar experience in Iraq and Afghanistan when the U.S. had hired Blackwater Security to provide security for U.S. Private organizations and civilians in the country, so that soldiers will have more time to be engaged in the battle. These people were making a hell of money. They are making more money, far more money than even the top senior military officers of the United States Armed Forces. So yes, it's all about money, 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 and very little or no consideration to issues of human rights and following the norms and conventions and treaties that have been signed by various countries.
Is that all that drives a mercenary? Don't they suffer from PTSD? Don't they want to make as much money as they can in as short as a time as they can and stop doing what they're doing? Is there anything like bloodlust involved where they want to keep going back to do atrocious things? You know that some of these Wagner Group's members have been accused of atrocities as well.
Well, you're talking about, people who are, recruited from prisons, for various offenses. So these are people who are not reasoning normal, like an average individual with reason. And so for them, they are in for what they are going to benefit. And those who are leading them are in for what is going to come to them. And so they are not regular people. They are not normal human beings. These are hardened criminals who are recruited from the prisons. So, in fact, they have actually nothing to lose. And everything to gain by continuing to operate as mercenaries. And in fact, some of them consider themselves blessed and lucky that they had to leave the prisons to come and serve, in a company where they get paid and they make fortunes.
Okay, thank you so much. I was going to quickly ask you about the Afghanistan withdrawal and also Vietnam, about the PTSD that soldiers suffer after a war. But we've run out of time. We'll do that again. But
sure, everybody in such terrible situations as war and conflict, they do suffer all of that. So nobody is exempt from it. Even though they are hardened criminals, they are still human beings. They will still suffer the things that ordinary, normal, conventional soldiers will suffer. So yes, everybody suffered PTSD.
Thank you, Captain Bish Johnson, for being with us and your insight this morning on the issue. Captain Bish Johnson is a retired U.S. Army captain, national defense and military strategist who joined us from Abuja. Many thanks.
Thank you very much, Olimide, and enjoy your day.
You too. From there now, we turn our attention to the Ukrainian Grain Association, who are asking the EU to increase the capacity of the so-called solidarity lanes to help it export grain following the collapse of the Black Sea grain deal. The EU established the solidarity lanes last year after Russia's invasion to try to help Ukraine export grain and other agricultural products by providing alternative transit routes via rail, road, and inland waterways. Outlining its proposals on its website, the Traders Union said it wanted exports via the lanes to grow by 1 million to 1.5 million tons a month and suggested European carriers and ports involved in the transit of Ukrainian grain should receive partial compensation from the European Commission in the form of subsidies. Now, the union believes this will lead to a significant reduction in the cost of grain transportation and will enable Ukrainian farmers to export surplus grain without losses to countries that need it, thereby stabilizing global food security. The Biden administration has imposed sanctions against 3 Malian officials accused of facilitating the Wagner Group's presence in the country. This action comes weeks after Wagner chief Yevgeny Prigozhin led the unsuccessful revolt against the Russian government. The Wagner Group is deeply entrenched in Mali and is accused of committing atrocities there. The U.S. Treasury Department explained that since the arrival of the group in Mali in December 2021, the number of civilian casualties there have surged by 278%. It added that many of the civilian deaths were the result of operations conducted by Malian armed forces alongside the Wagner Group. The sanctioned individuals are Mali's Minister of Defense, Colonel Sadio Kamara, the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, Colonel Alou Diarra, Malian Air Force Deputy Chief of Staff, Lieutenant Colonel Adama Bagayoko, for their roles in supporting the Russian mercenary group. According to news releases from the Treasury Department in the United States, Kamara planned and organized the deployment of the Wagner Group in Mali, And in 2021, he made several trips to Russia to solidify the agreements between the Wagner Group, the Malian transition government to deploy the Wagner Group to Mali, according to the Treasury Department. Diarra, in his previous role as air logistics chief, significantly contributed to the logistical movement of Russian entities in Mali. The statement also identified Bakayoko as serving as an advocate for the Wagner Group to the Burkinabe transition government, working to secure Wagner Group's deployment to Burkina Faso. And now, we'll turn our attention now to the business side of things, and our correspondent Laddie Williams is with me in the studio. Laddie, a very good morning to you.
Good morning.
Just the other day, we were talking about the digital ruble.
Right.
And now, apparently, President Putin has signed it into law.
Yeah.
What are the ramifications of this?
Yeah, so, yeah, the pilot, started a while back now. We've been watching out for when they would actually, sign it into law. And finally, there are indications that the ruble, that's the digital ruble, is now going to become, legal tender in Russia. And we've seen how, the sanctions have impacted, Russia and the global financial, system, and how that inflation has also impacted that country. So with the sanctions now, they've been looking for ways to bypass these sanctions, so they can make their settlements abroad and all of that. But with the digital ruble, which is definitely, Bitcoin inspired at this point, we've seen a lot of countries try to, develop their central bank digital currency, all in a bit to just make currency printing cheaper, because with central bank digital currencies, it's cheaper, compared to fiat. When you print fiat, you spend money, printing fiat.
So, wait, sorry, so walk me through it. Walk us through it. Digital ruble, digital money. You don't put it in your purse.
Yeah,
you don't put it in your wallet.
It's not physical, it's not tangible.
So you do, everything is via your phone.
Exactly.
Everything is electronic.
Yeah, so you just
is it safe?
get a wallet.
Yeah?
Yeah, so apparently with the blockchain, it's supposedly safe, because it cannot be altered, it cannot be, hacked. And, the thing about central bank digital currencies is they have is more centralized, at this point.
Okay.
With other currencies like Bitcoin, that's decentralized. So, it cannot be altered, cannot be changed. You can transfer money. You can send money to abroad now. You can send $1 million for a fee of just maybe $1 or so. So that's what, they're trying to replicate there with central bank digital currencies. And it helps for, to make global payments. It's easy.
Does it help them to bypass a number of these sanctions?
Oh, yes, they'll be able to bypass, most of the sanctions, because at this point, they don't need the global financial, platform to make some of those payments. All they need is just a wallet and a receiver with the same wallet. So it can just send you a digital ruble from Nigeria, and you get it in seconds. So basically, you don't need any other authority aside the central authority, which is the issuer, which is the Russian, the central bank at this point.
Very interesting. The Russia-Africa summit for 27th to 29th.
Yeah.
What can we expect?
Yeah, so it's going to be about grains at this point. And we know with Russia pulling out from the Black Sea grain deal, we're seeing Russia trying to, let Africa know that we still have your back. We're still going to, get grains to you, even though we're going to pull out, from this deal. So, yeah, it's basically that competition we're seeing, with Russia and the West, for influence in Africa, basically. And we're seeing, Russia trying to get, ahead of that, even though they're having to deal with a war and sanctions at this time. So they pulled out of the Black Sea grain deal, but they're trying to let, Africa know that, because a lot of African countries depend on, Russian wheat at this point and Ukrainian wheat. Both countries account for over 60% of global supply. So they are both important, countries when it comes to grain. So they're trying to let us know that, what, even though we're pulling out from the deal, we still got you, Africa. We will send you, grains, better prices than Ukraine. But at the end of the day, we know that this is going to cause huge, shortage. We're already seeing wheat prices react to that. It's up about 2% today. Right. On the CBOT. So at the end of the day, anything that disrupts supply is definitely going to impact price. And that's the risk of global hunger, you know, at this point.
We want to avoid that. President Putin obviously put pay to that controversy on his presence at the summit by saying he's going to join them virtually.
Yeah.
No brainer.
No brainer.
Thanks, Laddie. Laddie Williams, our business correspondent, who you should join on Business Morning after this program. And that's where we leave it for today. Thank you for watching. I'm Olumide Macaulay. See you next time.